Welcome, everyone. This is Fun with Reading, Mapping the Road to Understanding, Part 3 of the Roadmap to Reading workshop series. My goal today is to give you some practical tools that you can use right away at home to support your students as they're becoming strong readers. Whether your child is just starting to read or you're helping an older child strengthen foundational skills, you're in the right place. My name is Janelle Martinez, and I am the Early Literacy Coordinator for Sequoia Grove Charter Alliance. I've been a teacher for nearly 4 decades. Seriously, it'll be 40 years in August of 2026. I've taught every grade from pre-K through high school. I've been working with homeschooling families for 19 years. I've been with our schools since 2018. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and despite being dyslexic, we are a family of readers. We all have different tastes in reading materials, and some prefer ear reading, audiobooks, to eye reading, regular books and Kindles. Personally, I enjoy them both. I am so happy to be the early literacy coordinator for our schools because reading is my life. Seriously, when people ask me my hobbies, reading, top of the list. And now my job is to come alongside parents like yourselves and help you help your kiddos as they learn to read. And not just learn to read, but to love it. I love my job. The first 2 workshops in this series were on phonological awareness, understanding that words and syllables are made of individual sounds, and phonics, which is how to decode sounds to form the words. We also looked at the role vocabulary plays in reading. These are fundamental first steps to becoming a great reader, but they're not the end. This workshop is going to focus on the last 2 pillars of the 5 pillars of reading, Fluency and Comprehension. And we're going to review and expand on what we began in the last workshop about vocabulary. We know that strong readers don't just decode the secret message behind those symbols on the page. They understand the message. But understanding depends on a good vocabulary, because the more words you know in spoken language, the more you will understand in written language as well. Understanding is also tied to fluency, how quickly and accurately you can decode or recognize the words on the page. Which brings us to comprehension, gaining meaning from the words that you're decoding or recognizing. Fluency and comprehension are often taught separately, but each heavily affect the other. The more you understand what you've decoded, the better your fluency will be. And the more fluently you can decode the words, the better you'll understand what you're reading. The fact is, if one of these areas is weak, reading feels hard, even if the child can read the words. So let's start with a review of vocabulary, the hidden navigator of comprehension. Because if you don't know what the word means, it does affect your understanding. We know that building vocabulary is critical. Vocabulary gaps grow exponentially over time. If a kindergartner comes in with a gap in their vocabulary, by the time they're in middle school, that could be huge. Vocabulary is a strong predictor of later reading success. And just to throw another curveball into the works, oral vocabulary, which is heard and spoken, and reading vocabulary, which is seen in print and often more advanced, are actually 2 different things, but they do affect each other. So what are some practical things that you can do today to expand your child's vocabulary? First, talk a lot. Real conversations with your kiddos. And don't be afraid to use the big words. And if they look at you blankly or ask you what it means, explain the words to them. Reading aloud. Reading rich, varied texts aloud every day. And don't forget audiobooks. Those are a great tool for expanding vocabulary, and they're a lot of fun. Revisit and use new words often. Repetition is remembering. Encourage them to use new words. You can even do a thing with a little jar or container where you're putting paper clips in every time you use the word. And when you get to 20 times that you've used this word, you get a little prize, or, however you want to work that with your family. And finally, Teach words in context, not in isolation. So, using them in sentences, using them in conversation, as opposed to using like vocabulary flashcards or even some vocabulary games where they're just giving you the words and the definitions. Studies show that you have a 30% better retention of that word if you're using it in context. And in the description below, there are some links to vocabulary building games and activities to make learning new words fun. There's also a link to a personal dictionary that you can print and assemble to write down all of the new words that your student is learning. It's a great record of all the words that they have learned throughout the year. It's a good keepsake. So, do you work on your own vocabulary? What do you use? A game? An app? Please share ideas with me. I'm always looking for fun ways to learn new things. I play freerice.com. It's a game with a quiz format, and students can play it too. There are different difficulty settings. For every correct answer, 10 grains of rice are donated to the UN World Food Program. And no, it isn't actually 10 grains of rice. I did research it. The monetary equivalent of those 10 grains is donated by independent sponsors to the program. Check it out. Now let's look at fluency. Reading with accuracy at a reasonable pace with expression. Reading so well that you sound like you're talking instead of reading. Fluency is often taught before comprehension, but like I said earlier, they go hand in hand. Parts of fluency, such as reading with accuracy, absolutely affects comprehension, but comprehension will affect fluency in pacing and expression. Many students improve their fluency organically. As their decoding improves, they read more quickly and accurately so they understand more. And then they begin to use expression as they read, especially if they've been read to a lot. They're going to pick up from you how to do the voices of the characters, how to sound sad or excited as the passage indicates. So, how do you even know if your child needs to work on fluency specifically? Well, here are some things to look for. First, word by word reading. Now, this is a judgment call on your part. You have to determine, is this a decoding issue or a fluency problem? Because a student who struggles with decoding will still be reading word by word. But if they have seen the word many times and they're still struggling, it may be fluency. Ignoring punctuation. Again, kiddos who are having trouble with decoding often do this. They can see the big word coming later in the sentence, so they skip the minor things like punctuation or even the small words so that they can put all their focus on that big word. So specifically, teach punctuation. After all, punctuation has a great deal to do with meaning. If I say, I want a cookie, and I put a period at the end of that, it's just a statement. But if I put a question mark at the end of that, it might indicate some disbelief. I want a cookie? If I put an exclamation point at the end of it, it's a demand. I want a cookie. And finally, very slow or very fast reading with poor understanding. Honestly, I've not met many students who read fast with poor understanding. Usually it's the opposite, and many times poor decoding skills are the real root cause. Okay, so you've been working with your student, and you are pretty certain that decoding isn't the issue, it's fluency. So how do you improve fluency on the down low? Because you absolutely do not want to make a big deal about it and make your student self-conscious and never want to read out loud. Something that is a lot of fun is echo reading. First, you read a passage, then your child repeats it, and you will see they are going to mimic your expression, your pacing, etc. Choral reading can be very effective. You are reading it at the same time as your kiddos are reading it, all together out loud. This works really well with a book that you have read over and over and over. In my house, that book is Green Eggs and Ham. We must have read it at least 4,000 times. And even the littles who can't read yet, quote unquote, read the book with us because we all read it together, and it's just a lot of fun. Poems or songs. These are short pieces that you can try different voices with. For example, Jack and Jill went up the hill. Try reading it with a monster voice or a baby voice. And in the description below, there are silly voices cards that you can print and take turns drawing in a game to see what voice you're going to use next. There's also a spinner that you can print and have laminated, then attach the arrow with a brad. It has fewer options, but kids love spinners, and both of those are in the description below. And finally, the most practical path to fluency is simply repetition, reading books over and over. This is easily done with short stories like decodable books. When I was in school, I never wanted to read something twice. I already knew the ending. I wanted a new story. If you have a kiddo like me, try giving them the option of choosing their favorite story out of 3 or 4 to read over and over to work on fluency. And here are some more fun activities and games linked in the description below. All right, let's move on to comprehension. After all, this is the ultimate goal of breaking a code, which is what we're doing when we read, right? It is possible to decode well but still not understand, and this goes way beyond simply answering questions at the end of the passage. So what is really going on when we're comprehending something that we're reading? First, we're activating prior knowledge. What do I already know that applies to what I'm reading? For example, if I'm reading a story about a poodle, but I have never seen a poodle before, I don't know what this story is describing. As I'm reading along, I can see that this is clearly talking about a dog, so in my mind, I'm going to be picturing the types of dogs that I know. And then the passage might say something about the poodle's white curly hair. Okay, now I'm picturing a dog with white curly fur. That changes my picture, but my picture was already there because I activated the knowledge that I had, and I'm bringing it to the passage and putting it together with what I'm reading. I'm also checking for meaning. Is this even making sense to me? Can I even imagine a dog with white curly fur? Yes, it does make sense. Please note that both of these are subconscious almost. It's something that's happening in the back of your mind as you're reading these passages. And then, even more subtly, I am making predictions about what I think is going to happen next. For example, I'm reading a story about Susie and Johnny who are outside playing kickball, and Johnny gets mad and takes the ball and goes inside. In my mind, based on my background knowledge, based on probably my life, I am going to be picturing what's going to happen next. Is Susie going to go after Johnny and get that ball back? Is Susie going to tell her mom? Is Susie going to say, oh, well, I didn't want to play with you anyway, and go off and find something else to do? I'm going to predict what she's going to do, even though I haven't gotten to that part in the story yet. And again, this is a split-second thing that's going on in my mind underneath the surface as I'm continuing to read the passage. And I am also making inferences. The passage may have never told me at all why Johnny was upset and left. The passage may not have told me how Susie is feeling about this, but I am inferring from what I am reading some of these things behind the scenes. Please notice that these are all internal processes. You aren't even aware of some of these things sometimes as you read. But if you teach your students to be aware of what they're thinking about as they read, it will improve their comprehension. And this brings us to the final 2 aspects of comprehension: summary, can you explain briefly what you've read about? And questions, did you read well enough to answer questions about what you've read? Notice that these last 2 are external, not internal. These are explaining the passage to someone else, but the first 4 are what is going on in your mind as you read. Unfortunately, too often our curriculum relies only on these last 2. But if you teach your kiddos to use all of these aspects of comprehension, they will be miles ahead of the crowd. The best way to teach your students to use all of these aspects of comprehension is to break down the passage into small chunks. A page in a picture book, a paragraph in a chapter book. And first you're going to look for facts. You're going to figure out who did what. And by the way, this is a great tool for teaching grammar later on down the road, because if your kiddos can figure out who did what, they already know the subject and verb. They just have to learn the term subject and the term verb, and they will be able to find those easily in a passage. Then you're going to focus on more W's. Where, when, how. All of these are facts that you're going to glean straight from the passage. And last, you're going to ask why. And this is where the reading between the lines comes in. You're calling on background knowledge and you're making inferences. Okay, so let's practice this together. I have a short little passage here. Read it with me and then we'll break it down. Susan got wet on the way to Jennifer's house. Jennifer's mom loaned Susan an umbrella for the walk home. First, we're going to look at who is this about. There's only 3 possibilities. We have Susan, Jennifer, and Jennifer's mom. But if you read the passage carefully, you realize that the whole thing is about Susan, and Jennifer's mom were just part of her story. Okay, what did Susan do? Susan got wet. She also borrowed an umbrella, but she wouldn't have needed to borrow an umbrella if she hadn't gotten wet. So the main thing that Susan did was get wet. Now let's add some details. Where and when did this happen? This happened on the way to Jennifer's house. We don't know exactly when it happened, but we do know where she was. She was walking to Jennifer's house. And finally, we're going to ask why. Why did Susan get wet? Well, you could have some pretty imaginative answers here. She spilled her water bottle all over herself. She stepped in a mud puddle. She got caught by the sprinklers. But if we go back to the passage, she would not have needed to borrow an umbrella for any of those situations. So the only reasonable answer is she got wet because it started to rain, right? Please note, this passage never once says anything about rain. This is inference. This is reading between the lines. Ask your kiddos to explain how they know it was rain. They're going to have to think about it. They're going to have to look at the passage and they're going to have to pull from their prior knowledge of using umbrellas. And then you ask, what happens next? And they're going to make a prediction. Susan got home and she got in trouble because she wasn't supposed to forget her umbrella. Or Susan got home and she had to change her clothes because she was all wet. Okay? So you do this out loud when you're reading a book to your child and have discussions about what they think is going to happen next before you turn the page. You do this as you're reading to them and they get used to this idea and they start doing it internally as they read to themselves later on down the road. Now let's take a second to talk about summaries. Most children do not find summarizing easy, so you will need to teach them how to do this. So using the previous story about Susan and the rain, we can summarize that in one sentence with who and did what. Susan got caught in the rain and borrowed an umbrella. In one sentence, I explained the who and all of the things that she did. We can summarize anything in one sentence. For example, Cinderella. Cinderella was bullied by her stepfamily but went to the ball and married the prince. By the way, this is also the key to finding the main idea, which is a question you see a lot in the comprehension section at the end of a passage. So you teach to summarize with one sentence first, and then you add details in order of importance. For example, my summary of Cinderella, I could add a sentence about the fairy godmother helping Cinderella, another about losing the glass slipper, and then how the prince found the slipper and searched for Cinderella until he found her. And now my summary is a paragraph. This teaches kids to retell stories in their own words, which is something that I found a lot of high school students still struggle with. And in the description below, there is a link to more comprehension ideas. Okay, let's add some writing into this equation because writing indicates mastery. If you can write about it, you really do understand it. What does writing do for you? Well, for one thing, writing changes vocabulary from words that you recognize to active long-term memory. Regular writing practice, such as journaling or note-taking, it solidifies word usage. It facilitates vocabulary retention in your brain. Writing activates specific brain regions used to store words for immediate, effortless recognition. So the next time you see that word, you know it. Your fluency increases. Writing can boost comprehension scores on tests by up to 24 percentile points. That's not your grade going up 24 percentage points. That's your class ranking moving up 24 points. So basically, out of 100 students, you have moved 24 places closer to the head of the class. Writing acts as a tool for thinking. It allows the reader to process and organize and keep the information in their heads. Writing includes summarizing, note-taking, responding to questions, not just essays, it's writing at all. And there are more writing activities linked in the description below. And this is just a quick plug for journals. I got this idea from one of my amazing families in Feather River, and the 3 girls who are using these are doing very well academically. You can use these for kindergarten on up, and as kiddos get older, get the ones without the dotted primary lines. They have these up through college rule lines. Use them for all subject. A different page is a different topic. And you don't have to draw at the top of the page. You can glue or tape a picture from online, or even use those little Polaroid instant print cameras for kids as they do nature walks, etc. Start off with the littles dictating to you, then have them write a few words, and eventually you work your way up to pages of essay writing. And that's it. I hope this workshop has given you a lot of ideas and helpful tools as you teach your students fluency and comprehension. And as always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach me anytime at earlylit@sequoiagrove.org. Thank you, everyone.